based on my interpretation biblically. You know, that's where my views come from mostly, is God. You know, scientifically, politically, things can kind of get skewed for everybody, and I understand that. But for me, when we talk about some of these things, they're going to be biblically related, so I just wanted to put that out there. We use the slogan Black Lives Matter because, A, they do. It is recognizable, and it is a motto born of the abuse that Black people suffer. You know, if we try to change the motto, not everybody would be on board with that, but when you say Black Lives Matter, people pay attention. It's out there in the news, it's out there in the media, but we don't want everybody to think that we're just associated with the website. We don't hate police officers. We don't condone looting and rioting and all that kind of stuff. So we just want to make that clear that that's where we're at right now. Miss Jackson sent me a video day before yesterday, and I don't know if any of y'all have watched any of these videos on Facebook, and I'm going to kind of be going back and forth, so I'm sorry this isn't going to be a super smooth transition. But these are called Uncomfortable Conversations with the Black Man. And this is Emmanuel Acho, and he's going to talk about it.
Welcome to the first of hopefully many episodes.
Sorry, I'm going to put up here. This isn't the one that she sent me, but it is one that I wanted to touch on because it was important to me.
Uncomfortable conversations with the Black man. In the midst of all this chaos in our world, so many of y'all have reached out to me, and by y'all, I mean white people, have reached out to me asking, how can I help? How can I join in? How can I stand with you? So I created this for you. Because in order to stand with us and people that look like me, you have to be educated on issues that pertain to me, and fully educated so that you can feel the full level of pain, so that you can have full understanding. I firmly believe that if the white person is your problem, only the white person can be your solution. And so this is made for you, my white brothers and sisters, to increase your level of understanding so that you can increase your level of compassion and lead ultimately to change. So consider this a safe space to answer so many questions that I've seen from y'all. The first question I've seen a lot of, Emmanuel, why are y'all rioting? I understand protesting, but why riot? And to that I submit this. MLK said that rioting is the language of the unheard. For years, Black people have tried peacefully protesting, going back to 1965 and before with the Selma March, and that didn't work. And then in 2016, Colin Kaepernick, he took a knee, and that agenda got moved to a flag, which was never the goal. He just wanted...
Okay, so right there, Colin Kaepernick. I know, and I'm going to tell y'all right now, many people, including myself, were openly critical of Colin Kaepernick. And what we did not understand at that time was he was using his platform, what he could use at that time. It wasn't anything against the military, and trust me, I come from a military family. Three out of four of my brothers are in the military. My biological father was in the military. Most of my uncles, my cousins, one of my cousins was killed in Afghanistan. So it's nothing against the military. He was trying to use the platform he had. He never said that he was oppressed, you know, because that's another thing people like to say. What does he know about oppression? He's rich. He was raised by white people. He was adopted. What does he know? What do any of us know? Just because you don't live that life does not mean that you cannot be sympathetic to people who are in that position. And while he recognized it, he used his platform to further that recognition. And we all saw it, and people were very, very critical of him. And people, I mean, he doesn't have a job anymore. And whether you believe he was a good quarterback or not, you know, that goes into football, and I'm not an expert in football. But we were really critical of somebody that was just using their platform, just like we're using our platform here. He protested peacefully, and we got mad at that. And then we're protesting because people are rioting and looting. But where's the common ground on that? What are we supposed to do? He was peaceful, other people were angry, and There's no making everybody happy in that. And then they ask, well, what does he do personally about oppression? Well, he has donated over $1 million to 40 different organizations. That does not include the money that goes into running his Knowing Your Rights camps. In addition, his donation to the Somalia famine relief was part of broader work that he did with Ben Stiller that raised $3 million and helped get a plane to deliver supplies to Somalia after they were hit by the hurricane. So when you ask, what did he do? He is doing something. It's not just talking, he's taking action, and that's important for us to do.
To raise awareness on social injustice. So that didn't work. And so now we've seen riots because black people and hurt people, they're trying to get the attention of the oppressor. They're trying to raise awareness of the oppression. I was biking around Lake Austin the other day, and there was a white girl about 15 meters ahead of me. And as I'm on my bike, I say to her, on your left, because I want to notify her I'm coming so that she can change her course of action. I get 10 meters away and I increase my voice. On your left, because she had yet to move. I get 5 meters away and she's still there, and I say, on your left, because I realize if she doesn't change her course of action, there will be a collision. And as I approach her, I yell, on your left, and we collide. My goal was never to hit her, but because she had her headphones in, she didn't hear me, so she didn't change her course of action. I believe that that's the same thing black people are doing now. 1960s, we're yelling, we're oppressed. But the course of action wasn't changed. And so we again yell, we're oppressed. But the course of action wasn't changed. And so again we yell, we're oppressed. And now you see the collision that's occurred in America. So,
do you see that people riot and loot because they're not heard? I don't know how many of y'all watched the George Floyd video, but I did. And when he cried out for his mom, it broke me. It absolutely broke my heart. Because, you know, at the heart, if you're a mom, you get this, and you hear somebody cry, Mom, Mom, and you see 20 heads turn around. Because when somebody's crying for their mom, everybody's their mom in that moment. Everybody. And it might be different for dads, and I totally understand that. But as a mom, your heart breaks because that's somebody's child. That's somebody's father, somebody's brother. And we have to put a face to that. We have to put recognition to that. If that was my child, you bet, and I talked about this, I would burn down every building in this city until my kid got justice. And that's just the truth. And I can say something like that. But if somebody else, if Miss Jackson came up here and said that, people might have a problem with that. Just because we look differently. If Porter came up here and said that, imagine him, look, he's a big guy. And then he turns into a stereotype of the angry black man because he's upset about something I can be upset about. You guys understand it coming from me. But coming from him, it might be taken differently. It would be perceived differently. All because on how we look. And that has got to stop. And let's not act like white people don't riot. Ever. Because here are some things that white people have rioted over. This is San Francisco in 2012. That's because their baseball team won. Denver in 2014 because their football team lost. Vancouver in 2011 because a hockey team lost. And that's Canadian, so I can't really comment. Keene, New Hampshire 2014. This is at a pumpkin festival. Literally, like, they're picking pumpkins, and these teenagers, I think somebody actually died in this because they just went wild over pumpkins. Tennessee 2010, because Lane Kiffin was no longer going to coach their football team. Pennsylvania 2011, following the firing of legendary football coach for ignoring the sexual abuse of children. His assistant coach was abusing kids. He ignored it. The school fired him, and people stood with him saying that he should not have been fired. and then they rioted and did this. Lexington, Kentucky in 2012, their basketball team won. Boston in 2004, their baseball team won one game. I guess they don't win a lot of games over there. I don't know what team they are. But that was one game, and a woman was actually killed in this riot. And then West Virginia in 2014, also because their football team unexpectedly won a regular season game. It wasn't a playoff game or anything, but I guess they weren't expected to win. They turned over vehicles and did that. So let's not pretend that rioting and looting is just a black people thing. They're doing it because they're upset about social injustice. These people are doing it over sports. It literally has nothing to do and no effect on their life whatsoever.
Well, I don't condone rioting, and I'm sure you don't either. Because for the most part, black people and others that are looting and rioting destructively, they're burning down their own homes. But when you think about the 5 different stages of grief, you come up to one stage, which is called anger. And sometimes emotions, they don't know their actions. I remember my mom when I was a child, she lost her sister, and I just remember her yelling and screaming. And I come outside my room and I see my mom throwing herself into a wall, and I'm wondering what happened. And my dad told me that my mom's sister had died. Thinking back on that, throwing yourself into a wall, it's not going to change anything. You're actually harming yourself. But sometimes pain and hurt, it doesn't know how to express itself. You know, another question I get from my white friends, they ask me, why do you think white privilege exists? And I say this, if you and I were in a race, and the official at the start line, they held me back for the first 200 meters, and you had a 200-meter then head start, the only way to level out that race is to either stop you from running or put me on a golf cart and catch you up and catch myself up. Well, you see, what we've done in America is we've simply said, okay, Emmanuel, you're now free to run. And we've acted as if it's a fair race. When in all honesty, black people were held back for hundreds of years. And so within the late 1960s, we say, okay, black people, you can go now. That's not a fair race. LBJ, he said it best when he said, you can't shackle and chain someone for hundreds of years, liberate them to freely compete with the rest, and still justly believe that you've been fair. So white privilege is having a head start through the hundreds and hundreds of years of systematic and systemic racism. It's having a head start intrinsically built into your life. It's not saying your life hasn't been hard, but what it's saying is your skin color hasn't contributed to the difficulty in your life. I live it.
So that people get very confused when we talk about white privilege. My life has been hard. Nothing was handed to me. We're not saying that. We're saying your life hasn't been hard because of your color. We held people back for years and years. When he talks about 1960, my mom was born in the 1960s. So we're not talking hundreds of years ago. My mom's not here, so I can tell you it's about 50 years ago. There were people that were not allowed to vote until 50 years ago. There were people still being lynched 50 years ago. So we're not talking about, oh, it happened a long time ago. I didn't own any slaves. This didn't happen to me. I didn't do anything to you. You might not have, but you might have been alive during a time that it did. And I know at that time it was probably very hard to stand up and say something like, this isn't right. We shouldn't be doing this. And that's passive racism. And we might not realize it till now that that's what we were doing. But there's a saying now that everybody says, silence is violence. And if you don't stand up and say something to somebody, when you see something is wrong, I tell this to my kids all the time. These are some of my kids. Not Angie, she's a French. She's really small, she kind of looks like a kid. That's one of my kids. I have 5 of them. I tell them every day. Look at my Jeremiah, stand up. Stand up. He's 14. He is just going into high school. And I realize he looks like a big giant man, but he's my baby. But I tell him every day, God gave you a gift. You are 6'2" and 220 pounds at 14 years old. It is your job. It is your job to use the gifts that God gave you, that big, that smart. You have to protect the people that cannot protect themselves. How big is David?
Which one?
He's probably Chrissy's size, and he's Jeremiah's age. Or he's older. He's older. I tell those kids, these kids that go to church here, this is your family. One day I'm going to be gone. One day your mom's going to be gone. And all you're going to have is the people that are here with you. So you better stand up for those people, because those are your brothers and sisters. Not biologically, because all my kids are not biologically mine, but they are mine. Not all the kids in this church are biologically mine, but they are mine. And I'm not going to let another generation of kids deal with what we're dealing with now. It's not going to happen. So what he's talking about in this unfair race, I wanted to show you all this. I should have worn eyelashes today. That was dumb on my part. I was totally more prepared last time, honestly.
Hey, line up! Line up! Everybody line up! We're about to race! Everybody line up! Shoulder to shoulder! Pick up your backpacks! Backpack, line up! We're about to
This is a
race!
youth group.
Hey, we are racing for $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I've said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run that race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100 not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this is a family, and everybody's back on their line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes will smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this deal that has start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the league that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
That's privilege. Pretty much, we are what we were raised to be. So if your parents were Republicans, probably going to be a Republican. Parents were Baptists, probably going to be a Baptist. If your parents were broke and poor, or you were raised in a single family or single parent home, you are most likely to follow in those footsteps. And what we've done is not just cause a racial disparity, we've caused an economic disparity where we keep people in the position where we can have control. And it's not just us as a community, it's our own government. And it is our job to stop that here. I'm sure none of you guys want your kids or your grandkids having to have these same talks. People have been having these same talks for 400 years. And just like we're saying, we can all be in the race, but a lot of us have a head start. We oppressed a people for 246 years. And then we're just like, oh, yeah, go ahead and join the race. We're already 246 years ahead. And if you claim to be a Christian and love God, and you're not doing something about that, you are part of that problem.
In a fluid neighborhood in Austin, Texas, and if I ever go to my mailbox and I see a white woman walking up to the mailbox, I consciously sit in my car because I don't want her to feel like I'm a threat. If I'm on an elevator with a white person, I try to hit the button first and get off the elevator first because I don't want them to perceive me as a threat because I realize at any point in time, whiteness can be weaponized. We saw that this past week, Amy Cooper, Central Park, the woman who called the cops on a black man who wanted her to leash her dog because it was illegal to walk your dog without a leash. And she used two words that are a death sentence for black people. When she called the cops, she said, there's a black man who's threatening my life. Both of those things, as far as when you compile it together, were a lie. Because that black man, he was a bird walking. And while so many people saw that incident, and they were heartbroken, I, as a black man, saw that incident and was reminded of 1955, Emmett Till, 14-year-old boy who was lynched, mutilated, and killed by two white.
Remember, we talked about that last
Because a white
time.
woman made a false claim saying that he murdered. In 2017, that white woman recanted that story. In 1956, the two white men that killed him, they got off. And they admitted that they did it because they knew they couldn't be charged again with double jeopardy. That to me.
So Emmett Till was somebody we talked about in our last presentation. That's Emmett Till. He was a 14-year-old child, just like my 14-year-old child. He went into a store, and a woman accused him of, a white woman accused him of flirting. Her husband and her brother kidnapped him from his uncle's home, made him carry a 75-pound cotton gin can to the bank of the Tallahatchie River, ordered him to take off his clothes. They beat him nearly to death, gouged out his eyes, shot him in the head, and then threw his body tied to the cotton gin fan with barbed wire into the river. That is a 14-year-old child. 3 days later, his corpse was recovered, and he was so disfigured that Mose Wright, his uncle, could only identify him by an initial ring. His mother chose to have an open casket funeral. This is in 1955. There are some people, just guessing, that were alive in 1955 in this room. And things like this were still happening. There was absolutely no proof, and the men that did this to him got off because the state said they could not prove that was really Emmett Till because his body was so disfigured, so they did not have any proof that he was really dead. In 2017, a book was written by Tim Tyson, and the woman, the original accuser, Carolyn Brandt, recanted her testimony, admitting that Till had never touched her, threatened her, or even talked to her. Nothing that boy did could ever justify what happened to him. He was murdered on a false claim with no proof in 1955.
Is white privilege, the ability to weaponize your whiteness and the ability to live life unconsciously. Because I, as a black man, have to calculate every move I make the second I walk outside my house. Another question I get, that I'm sure several of y'all have thought, if not your kids have, how come black people can say the N-word, but we can't? I had to do some research on that to educate myself a little bit further. The N-word is synonymous with oppression, execution, and subordination. Black people were so long treated and viewed as no more than a slave to a master. We were viewed as dirt, and that word is synonymous with them. So there is a visceral reaction whenever we hear that word coming out of someone whose complexion is white that reminds us of the pain of our ancestors. Black people took something that was meant and originally used as evil, and we turned it into a term of endearment. So white people, I submit that you can't, shouldn't, and nor should you ever have a desire to say that word, whether quoting a rap song, a movie, or anything. Because remember, that word is truly synonymous with hatred. The abolitionist Frederick Baptist Church, he wrote talking about his master that reading and learning was spoiled and ended. Because remember, black people were nothing more than a slave to their master. And when you think about, well, then why should black people saying it? If I can't say it, then you shouldn't either, black person. We've been oppressed for so long, our rights have for so long been limited, that for you to now try to again limit our speech, it's painful. So that's why, in a nutshell, in a few minutes and seconds, why you can't say the N-word. Another question I've got so often, how come black people care more about white on black crime than black on black crime? It's not that we don't care about black on black crime, but let me propose this. When a black person commits a crime, they go to jail. When a white person commits a crime, they get off. And hopefully, they even get arrested. Ahmaud Arbery, the black man that was chased and gunned down by two white men in Georgia. It took us 2 months to arrest those perpetrators. And the only reason we did it, because we saw the video. Imagine if camera phone was 50. Black on black crime is an issue. But if you do the research, high violent crimes are all interracial. Blacks kill blacks, whites kill whites, Hispanics kill Hispanics. So it's not that we don't care, but it's the same issue as why y'all saying Black Lives Matter when all lives matter. We understand all lives matter, but right now, black people are dying at the hands of white people, and I can change that. Only you, my white friends, you all can change. So if you want to know how can you help, how can you stand with us, how can you stand with me? You must first educate yourself, so you know exactly what you stand for and why you stand. Because the only way you can solve this issue is through exposure, through education, through compassion, and through love. Thank you all for tuning in to the first of hopefully many episodes of Comfortable Conversations with Black. Consider this a safe space to educate yourself and help me help you by leaving your questions and sharing this with you. Because while you might think you're not it, someone you help, someone you love, it
So that's what we're trying to do here, is create a safe space for people who might have questions that you might not feel comfortable asking to the public. We're not here to judge you. We're not here to blame you, because I understand, as a mother of a very racially diverse family, I have a kid of every color except an Asian. And I'm just waiting. Ben says no, but I'm gonna get one. There were things that I didn't know that I had to come to my church family and find out. And you laugh. I don't know if any of y'all have seen that show, This Is Us, when she didn't know if her black son needed sunscreen. I didn't know either. I didn't know. I didn't know how to get his hair cut. I took him to the barber shop for the first time, and that barber straight up told me I've never cut a black kid's hair. And I was like, oh, isn't it just like regular hair? And he said, no, ma'am. And so I had to come here, and I had to get a barber to come cut my kid's hair, because it's different. They're different. And as because I'm Mexican, Ben is white, 60 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to be married. We couldn't have our family. You couldn't have interracial marriages. And at the last discussion, what was something that was brought up, and it really bothered me, and Reverend Porter answered him better than I could have, because I was frustrated, because he said he had all of the solutions, but he didn't offer any. And he talked about why do Black Lives Matter if, black on black crime and abortions and things like that. So I really had to do some research on that. And, Reverend Porter answered him very, very well. But I really had to dig into that. And, we started with the 13th Amendment, and that is, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution makes it unconstitutional for anyone to be held as a slave. There are exceptions, including criminals. So the abolishment of slavery freed 4 million people. 4 million people who were previously property, and almost wholly responsible for the economic productivity of the South. This left a significant void in the U.S. economy, leaving officials struggling with how to rebuild and put freed black people back to work in the most cost-efficient, yet still legal way. The answer turned out to be mass arrests for minor crimes such as loitering, vagrancy, and the creation of a system of convict leasing that allowed prisoners to work for private parties. Those prisoners were tasked with providing the labor to rebuild the economy of the South, making them slaves all over again. The prison industry. The United States is home to 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. Black men account for an estimated 6.5% of the U.S. population, but they make up 40.2% of the U.S. prison population. 1 in 3 black males is expected to go to prison in his lifetime, while it's 1 in 17 white males. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. We are the freest country, but we have more prisoners than any other country in the world. Why? Profit. Prisons are a multi-billion-dollar industry. Billion. U.S. taxpayers pay $69 billion each year to maintain the prison system. Detention means big money for profit prisons. CCA, their annual revenue for federal contracts is $752 million a year. Money spent on lobbying by CCA and GE Group include, since 2005, is $15.8 million. The quota for CCA has doubled. So who are CCA and the GEO? These are for-profit. Prison industry is dominated by two publicly traded companies, the Corrections Corporation of America, founded in 1983, and the GEO Group, founded in 1987. Together they control 73% of private prisons in the United States. So you can see this graph that the U.S. federal prison population has doubled, tripled, and it just keeps climbing. So how are we going to fill up these prisons? Because in their contracts, CCA requires that prisons stay at 90% full, otherwise the states pay a penalty. So we started this little thing called mandatory minimums. Which means, some of this didn't happen. That's okay, I'll just talk with my math. Mandatory minimums mean this. So, I am a gun owner. I carry a gun because if you're going to rob somebody at the store, it would probably be the lady with 5 kids trying to load her groceries and yell at her kids to get in their car, right? So, say I'm really broke and I need to feed my kids. And I decide, because I have some acres, that I'm going to grow some marijuana. This is very hypothetical, y'all. Don't put this out there. I have my gun with me, and I go to Rosie's house, and I go to Miss Jackson's house, and I go to Pastor Perry's house, and I sell them all marijuana. My first charge for going is convicted for drug trafficking. That's 5 years. My second sale is another 5 years. Having a gun during my second sale, that's an additional 25 years. I didn't pull it out on anybody. I didn't show it to anybody. I just had it. And I have it all the time. Having the gun during my third sale is an additional 25 years. That puts me in jail for 60 years. 60 years. Other crimes, voluntary manslaughter. If I get mad, Ben really makes me mad, and I run him over in the parking lot out here, they're going to maybe put me in jail for 5 years. I'll probably get probation. I haven't never been in trouble. I got a lot of kids. You know, it was a crime of passion. If I went out and tried to use an atomic weapon, that's around 30 years. If I kidnapped a child, that's 25 years. And selling child pornography is a 25-year sentence. So I could do all of those things and get less time than my little side marijuana business. Because why? We need to fill up these prisons, so we use these mandatory minimums, because these are low economic crimes. Usually people that do drug crimes live in lower economic areas. You know, and there was that like old saying, like, if you had a big family, people ask me this all the time, oh, y'all don't have cable? Guess what? If you don't have anything to do because you don't have any money and you can't go on vacations, most likely, I don't know how much marijuana is, but I don't think it's very expensive. I don't know. But that is a low economic drug. So therefore, the people who do those kind of crimes live in lower economic areas. So what did we do, the government, and we as a people, to cause this problem? Because it didn't all start with, oh, poor black people did drugs. That's not how this started at all. Blacks were not considered heavy drug users early in the century. They lived mainly in the rural South, were poor and had less access to opiates than whites who could afford doctors and patent medicines. Remember, back then it was like cocaine and opiates, like if you had a headache, you wasn't going to have a headache for long because your doctor was going to give you something and you would never know you having a headache for the next 3 years. A few field hands smoked marijuana, and like unemployed men maybe drank excessively, but with these exceptions, black neither had a disproportionately nor very serious drug problem. On the contrary, prevailing stereotypes of the narcotic addict were white and Oriental people. Blacks did not do drugs. After World War II, the situation changed completely. Not only were black addicts turning up more often in federal treatment centers, but they were being booked more frequently by the police to the point by the 1950s, half or more of all narcotic arrests involved black people. In 1910, there was not a single country that contained 100,000 black people, or a city. Like they were still very rural in 1910. By 1960, New York City alone had more than 1 million. In 1910, 73% of the black population was rural. In 1960, 73% was urban. So we had all these people moving into these urban areas. Black narcotic use was a byproduct of urbanization. Several factors made the narcotics tangle worse for blacks than previous groups. First, because of their color, blacks had been and continue to be the objects of racism. So you move into the city expecting, hey, I'm going to get this great job, everything's going to be fun, yay. But remember, Emmett Till was just killed 5 years ago, if it's 1960. So you're not going to come into the city and get this great job. That's not going to happen. Education and occupational handicaps and unemployment and poverty were conducive to drug and alcohol abuse. Urban blacks were especially vulnerable. Living for the present made more sense for those who felt excluded from the future. So if you didn't feel like you had a future, if you knew that you were never going to have a nice house or a good job or comfortability at all, any stability in your life, you would take riskier behaviors and do things for that moment. So yeah, drugs were fun and you could afford them. Oh, that's my best friend, y'all. That's Henry.
He just scooched me.
He just scooched me in. The war on drugs and poverty. So the Nixon administration began this cycle of criminalizing African Americans struggling with drug addictions rather than increasing resources for treatment and rehabilitation. So Nixon came in and he was like, we're going to do this big drug war and we're going to have all this stuff going on and but instead of helping these people, what are we going to do? We're going to put them in prison because remember we have those mandatory minimums. We have to keep up with that. We have to do these things. Republican Congressman Newt Gingrich admitted that the consequences for crack and the consequences for cocaine, you gotta look into this, basically they're the same thing. One is cheaper. Should have been the same. Crack was seen as a poor person's cocaine. In 1993, this is not that long ago because I have a sister born in 1990, crack smokers got 3 years. Coke snorters got 3 months. He described the sentencing disparity as having an enormous burden on the black community. On August 18, 1996, the San Jose Mercury News, and mind you, I lived in San Jose, I was born in California, and I told the last group that they could judge me on that later. They published the first installment of a 3-part series of articles concerning crack cocaine, the Central Intelligence Agency, also known as the CIA, and the Nicaraguan Contra Army. The introduction to the first installment of the series read, for the better part of a decade, A San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood street gangs of Los Angeles in the 1980s and funneled millions in drug profits to Latin America guerrilla army run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. Our own government was flooding poor communities with drugs to fund a war in Nicaragua. We were getting our own people addicted to drugs to fund a war overseas. And then we're going to turn around and arrest them for these same drugs after the government gave them to them. There's even a movie about that, I don't know if y'all seen it, with Tom Cruise called American Made, where he's a pilot and he flies drugs and money back and forth. But that's based on a true story. This was brought up in our last talk. Abortion in the Black community. This was tough for me because as a Christian, I am very pro-life. But it's very hard for me as a person to see everything in black and white. Social and economic disparities are particularly challenging to African Americans, from mass incarceration to maternal and infant mortality. African Americans have the highest maternal and infant mortality rate in the United States of America. There are still women dying in childbirth. With all the medical technology that we have, we are still losing African American women and babies at an alarmingly high rate. And it is because we do not give them the health care that they need. And a lot of times, it goes back to economics. If you work a very low economic job, you're not going to have great insurance. And if you don't have great insurance, you're not going to have great health care. So what are your options? You can quit your job and get on state-funded health care, which isn't that great. They tell you what doctor to go to, all that kind of stuff. But it is alarming the rate that the mortality rate for women in this country is. Abortion cannot be debated without considering the quality of urban schools, or the disproportionately high unemployment rate in black communities, or the significant racial disparities in health care. Religious teachings say that life begins in the womb, but having seen firsthand how their communities have been hurt by high incarceration rates, economic disinvestment, and lack of educational opportunities, some have a hard time embracing what they see as a one-size-fits-all abortion ban. So as the church, we drill into these women, pro-life, babies are a blessing. But only until they're born, and then we're like, well, you decided to have a baby, you take care of it. That's your fault. There was ways to prevent that, but we drill into her over and over and over that she doesn't have a choice. And if you live in a poor community and your education system isn't that great, because in poor communities your property taxes are lower, and what do your property taxes go to? Schools. And if you don't have a lot of money flowing into your school, then you're not going to have a lot of education. And that includes sexual education. So we're putting all this stuff out there, and once again, if you're poor, what's something fun and free? We all know what that is. My kids are in here. We all know what that is. It goes back to the people that don't have cable. We can save a child in the womb, but we also have an environment that could kill a child, said Cecily Smith, a black abortion opponent in Dallas, working to open a free clinic that provides pre- and postnatal care and other services for women. They both have to be worked on equally. And for me, there's a contradiction in the great concern that some lawmakers and activists showed toward a fetus versus a limited focus on policies on uplifting black communities. for those who are the most vocal about abortion and abortion laws. Most of y'all are my brothers and sisters in Christ, some of the people that have the most to say about it. But many don't care about the plight of the poor, or the immigrant, or the African American. Mind you, I'm vehemently opposed to abortion. But my argument here, let me play devil's advocate for a minute, is let's think about the entire lifespan of a person. If you're going to be pro-life, you better be pro-life to pro-death. From womb to tomb. Because you cannot beg and plead and have a woman say, bring this baby into this world, and then not take care of it afterwards. We cannot do that. Yeah, you can't just be pro-birth. So it kind of goes back to abortion, linking the past to the present, is historically, black women have had very little reproductive choice. Historically, race-based mistreatment that occurred during the 246 years of enslavement of Africans and their descendants involved many sexual and reproductive acts of violence against both enslaved African American women and their partners. Enslaved women also often experience legal, sexual, and reproduction exploitation. Some sources say that 58% of all enslaved women ages 15 to 30 were sexually assaulted by slave owners and other white men. Due to laws defining them as property, enslaved women had no legal protection. So remember how I said if your parents were Republicans or Baptists that you were going to end up that way too? We have basically ingrained into the society of these women that we control you, that you can't pick your sexual partner. You can't. Because if you were a slave, you couldn't get married. You could have a partner, but your partner might be sold down the river to somebody else. Or, yeah, and your child. And you didn't get to choose your partner all the time. You know, they had things like good breeders, and they thought that you would make strong children. So they would pick your partners for you. And so for these women to have some control, they would cause abortions as a way to revolt against that. Can you imagine having a child and just having that child ripped away from you and knowing what kind of life your child is going to have after that? And that continues to today. I cannot imagine even us bringing another child into this world right now. It's scary for the kids that I have. Can you imagine having a child knowing you don't have the money, the resources, the family, the support system? We have, in Marble Falls, more churches and gas stations than anything else. And yet, we sit here and we have all these people. You have the richest of the rich over in Applehead Island and the poorest of the poor over here in Granite Shoals and Kingsland. And we don't do anything about it. These churches are not reaching out. And you see some of these churches have huge, beautiful buildings and great things going on, but we are not doing our job and reaching out to these people who need us the most. Adverse sexual and reproduction health and healthcare experience continue for African American women throughout the Jim Crow era. Jim Crow laws restricted their overall civil rights, and some states and laws regarding rape protecting only white women. In the absence of laws to protect African American women, rape served to control them, which affected their self-esteem and self-worth. Many African American women were also endured public gang rape and genital mutilation before being lynched. Furthermore, eugenic programs, and for those of you who don't know what eugenic programs are, it's basically breeding programs that the Nazis used, emerged to control the size of the black population. These programs coerced African American women to undergo sterilizations without their full knowledge that these procedures were not reversible. Although eugenics thesis was refuted by scientists, several state-supported eugenic sterilization programs remained active, and 30 states supported formal eugenic programs that enforced compulsory sterilization from the early 1900s to the 1970s. The 70s. I was born in 1985. So this was still going on when my mom was a teenager. The longest running medical experiment in the United States was the Tuskegee syphilis study of the untreated syphilis in the male Negro. Beginning in 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service recruited poor and uneducated African American men in Alabama to determine the effect of untreated syphilis. Although treatment became available, the men were misled and denied treatment and were not informed of the study's findings until 1972. In addition to the study, subjects experienced syphilis-related morbidity and mortality. Some of their wives acquired syphilis, and then some of their children suffered from complications from congenital syphilis. The Tuskegee Health Benefit Program for those mistreated individuals was established in 1973. It expanded to their wives and children in 1975. The last widow receiving these benefits died in January of 2009, and there are still 11 offspring receiving medical and health benefits from this program. Alive today, 11 of these people's children that we did breeding programs on. And we're going to say that it doesn't affect us, that this happened in the past. It sure isn't in the past for them. This I just wanted to throw up there. It's called slacktivism. It's a term for those feel-good things that we do that make us feel like activists, but we're not really doing anything. You know, we're talking the talk, but we're not walking the walk. It's called systematic and systemic racism because it's ingrained in nearly every way people move throughout society. The policies and practice at institutions like banks, schools, companies, government agencies, and law enforcement. Extensive academic research and data collected by the federal government and researchers has documented numerous ways that Black Americans experience life in the United States differently than their white counterparts. The resulting data showed that these disparities exist in nearly every facet of American life. Black Americans are underrepresented in high-paying jobs. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that 54% of Asians worked in management, professional, and related occupations, the highest paying major occupational category, compared with 41% of whites, 31% of blacks. People of color, especially Black African Americans, are severely underrepresented at the top of corporate hierarchy. There are only, in the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies, only 8.7% of 675 companies had CEOs of color. As of 2020, only 4 Fortune 500 companies have Black CEOs. Black Americans have historically been underrepresented in the highest echelons of government. When the 116th Congress, which came into session after the 2018 midterm elections, it was the most diverse Congress ever, but only 57 of the 535 people in Congress were people of color. Black workers historically earned far less than white workers. In 2018, the average Black worker earned just 62% of what an average white worker works. And that's across all facets of every job. That's an average across the board. 62%. Similarly, overall income for Black Americans was 42% lower than for whites. There's a similar disparity on the household level. Lower incomes mean that the poverty rate for Black families is twice that of white families. Marijuana usage rates are similar between white and Black Americans, yet Black Americans are 3.64 times more likely to get arrested and charged on marijuana possession. When trying to get financing from banks, Black mortgage applicants were more likely to be denied loans than homeowners of other races. Thus, the share of black households that own their own home is lower. Lower income rates and higher rates of poverty combined with difficult getting mortgage approval means that home ownership rates for black Americans remains low. Educational opportunities are starkly split by race. A study by the Department of Education showed that in 2013, black high school students were only a bit more than half as likely as white students to have advanced placement or enter or get a degree, and only about a third likely to have a AP credit for math. The wage gap between races also interacts with the gender wage gap between men and women. In 2018, the typical black woman earned just 66% of what the typical white man made. So we know about the gender gap in pay. But if you're a black woman, there is not just a gender gap. You are earning almost 40% less than what a white woman earns. And 60%, 62% less, or 66% less than what a white man earns for the same job. So when people say that it happened a long time ago and they don't understand white privilege and systematic racism, all those things, 5 generations ago, your grandparents' grandparents could have owned a slave. 5 generations ago, I could have my family. 5 generations ago, I couldn't have married him. Black women got the right to vote when? In the 60s, 1965. So it wasn't a long time ago. It is still happening. And we have got to stop. And that's it. So if y'all have any questions, we want the floor to be open. Angie, do you have questions? Don't be embarrassed, because I know that you had some last time. But this is our safe spot. So if you have something you want to ask, we're here.
Already asked, so that's not the one that I was planning for a more private conversation with a couple of friends. But okay, so I mentioned last time that I'm going to teach this year, and the terminology that he addressed in there of black kids calling each other the N-word, that is something that I have seen in the school, and when we've been in mindset coach, and I fully believe that your thoughts become your words, become your beliefs, become your actions, and I get frustrated and I try to break that pattern with students when they call themselves or each other stupid or gay, or when girls call each other the B word, and I'm equally, I fully get what he was saying in that it's been reclaimed and that it's not used in that way, but how do I help facilitate that culture in my classroom where kids don't feel like I'm telling them you can't say that? And how do I communicate with families? Because the biggest thing I hear from teachers is they try to address that with families, and the families say, oh, well, he knows that home language. And I'm like, no, God, please, this should not be part of your vocabulary.
I understand, because I don't know how many have kids that are on TikTok. Me and Ben have TikTok too, so we're cool parents. But a lot of those songs and things on there mention that word. And it is very difficult for me because, like he said, it's turned into a term, but I don't let any of my kids say that word, and trying to turn down some of these songs that say it and turn them back up, after the word has passed, it has gotten extremely difficult. So I just don't let any of my kids say that word, but what about you?
It wasn't allowed in my house. Growing up, all the derogatory things that you heard mentioned, I experienced. One of my son's friends came by the house and he didn't know, and he let the word slip, and he got corrected quickly. And I explained, my son kind of looked at me because he never heard me say it. My son kind of looked at me like, I don't care what y'all do outside of here. but you will not do that in here. I don't use the word in my house. I don't allow that word to be used in my house. In fact, I don't play off-color jokes. No.
No, either. Anybody else? Thoughts?
I'm like Reverend Porter. I'm going to say that it wasn't allowed in my house. I don't allow it, and even the kids that I talk to today, if I hear it, I'll do my best to correct. The way I look at it is, if you don't want to be called that name, don't use that name. I don't allow it, and like you said, when you were coming up, if it even slipped out of my mouth, I'll still be looking for my teeth. Because that hand comes quick. And just to back up some that she showed and said, and like Reverend said, that he's been through, there is stories that we can tell you that is relevant to in today's. I'm a young man, but a lot of that she showed, I've been through it one way or another. And like she said, right now, what we're doing is we're having the conversation to stop all of that. Basically, like when I tell everybody, we're not looking for a hand up or hand out, but looking for equal opportunity. Be treated the same across the board. For you, stay on the kids, tell them it's just not allowed.
From a place of love, I'm like, I can't, in good conscience, allow you to worry about yourself or anybody.
Yeah, just tell them it's not allowed. If you want to use it, you use it at home, but not in your classroom or the setting. Like we talked about on the last group, on the last time around, when we start telling our friends this is not acceptable, not in a mean way, but in a kind, loving way, we begin to change attitudes and mindsets. So that is what we're looking for and aiming for, is to change the mindset of the ones around us. And like she said, we're in a safe place. Whatever question you have, I'm going to ask you, please ask, so that we're all on the same page when we get out of here, so that we can work on doing the right thing.
I would say I had a little trouble adjusting and thinking about like this. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I grew up basically child working poor. My dad worked 40 hours plus another job. And there were times where we didn't have food for the table or full in the front of us to eat. But my parents were too proud to go to help. So when people started talking about white privilege, I was like, I didn't get a scholarship to school. I didn't get free meals for that. So I had to think about it. And I was talking to a friend, and it hit me. We both have boys. She and I both have boys. I said, I think I got it. When our boys went out, we didn't have to worry that our boys might be stopped or picked up. Okay? so I feel like that's what kind of God put in my head to help me understand. That's my opinion.
And we hit on that last time because is Angel still over there fighting or anything? Angel, can you stand up for me? Jacob, can you stand up? Can you turn around and wave at her? So I don't know if you noticed, they look a little different. Those are both my kids.
They're God's children. Red, yellow, black, precious, and inside. Why do they treat them differently?
I have to worry about, and we did their DNA reports, something we talked about last time. The difference between the amount of African American that they have in them is 3.3%. But I can tell you the worry that I have for that one going out is significantly more than 3.3%. And so you can imagine as a mom raising biracial kids that I had to come to terms with, because I didn't understand white privilege either. And my own brother has deleted me off of Facebook for this. My own brother. I did not understand white privilege until I really had to think about if they got pulled over by the same police officer or had an experience with the same person at HEB, they would be perceived totally different. They could have totally different experiences.
And also some teachers look at color and get how they will do that every place. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
My husband taught school in South Carolina, and poor white kids, okay, the counselor would say, we'll find the money for you to go to college. And black kids were told, you might want to think about it, you're not going to be able to go to college kind of thing. My husband wouldn't say, well, it's like how the kids in special education. It was a mindset of counselors, how they treat the kids. It wasn't right.
Yeah, I get it. I go in for like little parent-teacher meetings, and they're like, "Are you sure you're their mom?" Yes, I'm sure. Trust me, I'm sure. They come home every day, so I kind of hope so that those are my kids. But yeah, people don't believe it, or they see us, and they're like, because most of our kids look like maybe they could have come from us. It's poor little Jacob right in the middle, and people are like, yes, yes, you need to call Maury, yes, yes. And with Jacob, it's like he's right there, and that's the only kid people question. You know, if I didn't have Jacob, if I took Jacob out of the equation, people would never question my family. They would never be like, are all those kids yours? And I understand we have a big family. You know, nobody has 5 kids anymore. I totally get it. I was one of 7, so I had a big family, and you know, I was the only brown one, and then I had several white siblings, and then my parents adopted twins from Mexico. So they automatically assumed my brothers, they're 20 now. They thought until they were 19 that I was adopted too, because they just could not fathom how my little short 5-foot-tall white mom birthed a big brown baby. Like, they just could not wrap their minds around it. And even now they're like, really? You're really gonna adopt? I'm really not. I came out of her. I swear I was there. I know. But it still happens. People still question that all the time. You had something?
Wonderful job.
Thank you. Thank you. I hate public speaking, so thank you.
So what do you think the next steps are?
For me, I want people to be talking about it. I want it to be fresh on people's mind. You know, a lot of people think that if you're pro-Black Lives that you're anti-police, and this is something we covered last time. But I'm not. Rosie's husband's a police officer. Angie's husband used to be a police officer. I don't hate the police. And I think you can be pro-police and pro-Black Lives. We should just be pro all those things. We need to be all those things. And, you know, we don't believe in defunding the police. And this is something I had to talk with my son about, because he asked me, why are people trying to defund the police? We need the police. And I had to go over that defunding and abolishing are 2 very different things. And that was something we had to talk about. But for me, it's we really need to have it on the forefront of our mind, like off-color jokes. You know, we kind of let things slide a lot of times. And me and my friends were actually talking about when we first were adopting the kids, we were at a birthday party for a friend, a 40th birthday party, and one of the women there said an off-color joke with the N-word in it. And Ben, just being very funny and very dry, and you would have to know his humor, just kind of goes, hey, my son is black, I'm offended by that. And he wasn't doing it to hurt her feelings. But she was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so, she called me at 6:30 the next morning, bawling because she felt so bad about it. But you know what? She's never made another joke like that because she didn't want to be that person. She did not want to let it slide. And even though he didn't say it out of anger, and he didn't say it accusational to her, he didn't hurt her feelings, it still planted that seed that, hey, maybe I shouldn't be saying things like that, because if I let that slide, my kids are going to let that slide, and their kids are going to let that slide, and we're going to still be in the same situation further on down the line. So as long as we're keeping it at the forefront of our mind and sharing our thoughts, like, hey, you know, I went to this discussion and, you know, I understand your frustration. I understand where lines get crossed, where people get mad, because even one of my friends, her husband's like, oh, I'm not going to go to that because I'm not racist. No. And, you know, I think a lot of times the good old boys crowd, and we have a lot of that in Marble Falls, and it's nothing personal against anybody. That's just the mentality and the mindset that people have is we've gone through life so much, and we have our parents up on this pedestal, and we've let this passive racism kind of go on in our houses, where like maybe we said the N-word when referring to somebody, or we said, oh, there's a difference between black people and the N-word, or there's a difference between white people and white trash, you know, and we let those things go and we don't address them. And those things need to be addressed. We cannot let our kids say, oh, I said it because he's not a black person, he's an N-word, and there's a difference. No, that just cannot go on. And I think because we have our parents placed up on this pedestal where, oh, my dad's not racist, my mom's not racist, you know, they've only said it once or twice and they didn't mean it, they would never do something. I understand that, I really do, because I have some friends that I'm in that position with, and I would never think that they would treat any of my children differently, but some of the things that come out of their mouth makes me question, just because they wouldn't do it to me because they know me, and I'm kind of a violent person, I might beat them up later. But if it was somebody they didn't know, would they feel differently? If they weren't with my kids all the time, would they feel differently? If it was somebody else's black son, would they feel differently? Because Jacob's real cute right now. That's what I tell everybody. He's real cute. Look at him. His little cheek. He's real cute. But is he going to be cute in 10 years? Is he going to be cute in 15 years? When he's a 6 foot tall black guy, is he still going to be real cute, or are you going to be threatened by him? And that's a scary thing that we have to examine in ourselves, because we might not think that we're racist, but we always put these labels on everything. And I think all of us, to some extent, have some racism in us, because we believe these stereotypes, like, and I'll just say it because I know nobody else wants to say it, but like, all Mexican people like tacos, or all black people like fried chicken. Well, I like fried chicken and tacos, so, you know, or we have all these things ingrained into us from the very beginning of time, and our parents that are passive racism, you know, these stereotypes. Like in California, the big thing is Asian people can't drive. Like, we have these things ingrained into us that we just think that are okay, but they're actually racist. You know, we have these labels that we put on people, and we say we're not doing it out of a place of hate. It's just funny, or it's just the way it is, and that is passive racism.
We had a neighbor across the street, and I had my hysterectomy, and him and had to go to work. And this man across the street was white. He came every day and brought me food to my bedroom. He sit on that little table there, anything else you need or whatever. I mean, super nice. Johnny and Kate. And they, I mean, good neighbors or whatever. So they had a party from family reunion or whatever. They came over, and he was just sloppy drunk. And somebody called him on the telephone. Oh, I'm just having a good time with my blank neighbor. And he looked right in my face, and he almost choked because he was selling something that he was already there. But when he saw, I mean, he just didn't know what to say. Then she started apologizing for him because he was drunk. But he was from Arkansas.
Yeah. And it's ingrained in here.
Yeah.
It's ingrained into people that think that way.
Yeah.
We all understand.
Yeah. But you know, we tend to let stuff go because that's just the way it is. And as far as the school system and the teachers, last year we were at the school with counseling for my great-granddaughter. This kid was calling her the N-word or whatever. But now, that child being was 3rd grade, 4th grade. 4th grade, she had never heard that name unless she heard it from home or on thing. So the teacher allowed it. No. The teacher should not allow those type things to go on in that particular classroom. Renee was in what class did Mr. Fritz class, and they were talking about the N-word shooter. She's the only black in the class, and they just continued to talk about that. Her being her, she just all cornered up and scared and whatever. We didn't learn about it for 2 days later, and they got to talking about it. But the teacher, she kept on and let it go.
Did you take it to the principal then?
Took it to the principal, and the next morning, well, he went to see Judge McClain, and Judge McClain kept him from going to jail. But he was upset. So we go to the next morning. The principal had deprogrammed those kids for that conversation. The next morning.
What happened to the teacher?
Nothing.
They had a contract with the district and they couldn't break it.
No, they were just, the way they were doing, that's the way they were doing. I taught resource. The black kids did not have educating or learning disability. They had discipline problems. So they just throw them in the resource so they could get the extra money.
Right.
These are the words from the principal. No, the counselor. They're not going to ever be nothing. Mm-hmm. So we'll just pass them on. And guess what? They didn't. And they just passed them on. Yeah. The same thing. Yeah. But it keeps on going, and the school system let it go. And we don't say nothing about it. Or you say something about it, and then you become radical. That's my nickname, radical.
Yeah. My husband was a resource special ed teacher in South Carolina, and he came up against the same thing.
Yes.
Putting discipline problems in my special ed classroom.
Exactly.
And he got no support from the administration.
Well, all he needed was a good woman.
You sound like my mother.
Well, that's one thing that really, like, we talk about white privilege, is what made Jesus to be one of them white, and he wasn't. God said, it just drives me crazy.
The white Jesus.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. That's
And you know, I Middle Eastern people
yes, we're not
are not white.
all of them.
You know, and I think because I mean, have you ever seen Asian Jesus? I mean, that Asian people have Jesus look Asian. So everybody kind of has their own version of how Jesus looks. But if we're going to get right down to the nitty gritty, Jesus looked more like Jacob than he looked like Ben.
Christians, the church going really think Christ is like.
Well, Christians, and this is just my opinion, are the biggest stumbling block to Christianity today. Because we've gotten so far away from being like Jesus that we want to judge and nitpick your Christianity. We are not spiritual anymore. It's turned into a political thing. Like if you come to church, and you want to talk about this, Scotty?
Too late.
So, Scotty is a friend of mine and Ben's who introduced us, and he kind of went down a rough path. And every now and then, he'll show up to church, and he usually sits in the back, and there's a person that was at our church that went up to him and told him that he shouldn't come into church dressed the way he was, or with a do-rag on his head, because it was disrespectful. And Ben just happened to be there, and, you know, Ben's a deacon of this church, and he has earrings and tattoos, and he looks scary, but he's way nicer than me, I promise you. He was really upset about it, because as far as I know, Jesus said, come as you are. And the church, this is supposed to be a hospital, you know, for sinners and not a museum for saints. And we get it real twisted that we need to come in here and at our best when, for me, I give Jesus the worst parts of me. You know, the dirty parts that I don't want to show everybody else. And I'm guilty of it too, is I often pick up what I've left at the foot of the cross. I'm real bad about that because I'm a little bit of a control freak. I just making sure he wasn't going to make a face. But as Christians, we aren't doing a good job of being Christ-like. And that is a problem. You know, and a lot of this stems from we want to politicize Christianity, and it doesn't need to be. You love them, you don't have to love their sin, you know, because the Bible is very black and white on what's sin and what's not. And there's no levels of sin. If you steal a cupcake or I murder Ben tomorrow, God sees that as sin. There isn't a level 1 sin and a level 10 sin. Sin is sin is sin. And so when we judge somebody for sinning differently than we do, that makes us a sinner too. And when we judge somebody on little parts of them, they don't dress nice, then we're judging just like a racist would judge somebody because they don't like the color of their skin. And so we can't pick and choose which parts of God we're going to follow. That doesn't work.
Whole thing. I like to describe Jesus as vapor, because vapor has no color. So if you are Asian, Hispanic, black, or whatever, your Jesus does not have a color. You have to accept him in your heart and your spirit as he is. He will reveal himself however he chooses in your life. But you don't have to have him. I mean, just because the picture is on the wall, that doesn't mean anything. That's just a picture on the wall, a representation. You know, people will sit around here 1,000 times. If you went to any black house in 1960 to 2000, you had Martin Luther King in there, and you had white Jesus with blue eyes. That's just where it was. And John F. Kennedy. Yeah, those are the three worshipers. You know, they had those people on the wall.
I grew up Catholic, and we had the Last Supper, you know, the big thing, the Sacred Heart Mary, and White Jesus. And that's how. And I was in a Hispanic household. We had White Jesus too.
Yeah. But when we take them off the wall and put them in our heart, that's when it becomes real. We take them off the wall and put them in our heart. Everybody had their purpose. You know, a lot of people want to fight about the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost and try the Spirit, and then they want to try to separate it. They all make one. You can't separate them because they are all one. Each one having its own purpose. God created us. He sent his Son Jesus. Then, because he was such a loving person, he gave us the Holy Spirit to keep us going until we go back on our differences, then we're not going to ever get along. What do we have in common? What do we have in common? Trying to go back to the Lord.
We all like fried chicken and tacos.
Yes. Fried chicken tacos, taco meat. Yeah, cornbread.
I like to call it
All right, Miss Angie, what you got?
Okay, so obviously white as white can be. I grew up in the ghetto of Houston, and I was the minority. I was the only white girl in my school. My brother was the only white boy other than an albino black kid. And my dad was a law enforcement officer, and he always taught me to be hyper aware and have situational awareness. No matter where we went, be aware of your surroundings. And I'm still that way today. I cancel on you all the time. I flake on you. I'm going to come, and then I stop. I have social anxiety. But my question is, if we're out and about in the store, I have RBF, which most of us, I think, know what that means, but I have a very mean look on my face, and it's just because I don't want to be in the store. But people perceive it as, I'm either scared or afraid.
That's why we all wear masks now.
But with actions and body language, how do we make black people feel more comfortable? Because I obviously, I'm a chatty Cathy because I get really nervous like right now. But what's the best way to make somebody feel more comfortable and not like we're intimidated or scared?
See, smile and be friendly. And I know that's hard for you because I have super bad anxiety too. Like, this makes me extremely nervous. Like, it makes me really want to sell marijuana. I hate public speaking, but for me, it's like, what it comes down to is I have to make it better for them. I have to consciously make that choice. And it's like, you feel uncomfortable because you're hyper aware and you have anxiety. Imagine how it feels being a black person in a white community. You know how it feels being a white person in a black community. Can you imagine being outnumbered 100 to 1, and then here comes you with your mean mugging everybody, and they're like, oh, that person must hate me, because it's all ingrained into us. We very much pick up on labels and perception and how we see people. Like, look at Ben, he's not very smart, but I promise you he's a really nice person. And when you look at him, you might not think that. When you look at Reverend Porter, you might not think that. But when you look at Reverend Perry, he's always smiling, always happy. And, when you look at Henry, he's so grouchy. But let me tell you, Henry has done more for my Christian growth than anybody else. I will tell you that right now. Even though he told me I couldn't be fighting folks all the time, he never got mad at me for being mad.
Because he's always mad.
He acknowledged my anger, at situations that I can control. And that's something you can't control. You can't control how other people perceive you. What you can control is how you put yourself out there. If you are smiling at somebody, you might think you're a friendly person. But right now we're all like,
and I'm smiling through this, and I'm like, oh God, look at you.
Chunky
Contact is so important. Just like you should be having to do this. But when the person is walking by or whatever, sometimes but if you make eye contact with that person, they know you acknowledge them. Now, when I make eye contact, can I say this? There's some black people that come around here in this town that won't even speak to me. And guess what? That makes me very angry. You know what I do? The next time they come around there, how you doing? How you doing? I want you to see me. Nobody like you don't see me, being black as I am. No, I want you to see me. I want you to know I have no issues. Just lock eyes. If you look out, lock eyes. And what is that thing? If you smile, the whole world smiles at you. You don't have to be going around there
Breathing like a chest, yeah, just a little.
And I get it because I be breathing like this in the store trying to breathe through this mask. I breathe this whole mask into my mouth. It's horrible. So I get it. I really do.
Oh, just smile. Just
Smile, be nice.
Be nice. Share something. They can't see it in their love.
She's talking. You mentioned the churches aren't doing that. Well, what could the churches do in other organizations? And the way ministry is like,
So, you know, I know that we see these things, like, I've been delivering meals for the Crisis Network, and I make the kids go with me, A, because it makes me feel a little bit safer, because sometimes we go to some places that aren't all that safe. But I was shocked to see how some people right here in Vernon County are living. I mean, I know what being poor is like. There are several times, you know, I've been a government employee, and I'm a glorified secretary. So we know what it's like to have more month than money. You know, I grew up the oldest of 7 kids, so I know what it's like to eat hot dogs. And we thought it was really cool that we were eating hot dogs all the time, but really we were just broke.
That's
We
a
didn't
bad
know
thing.
that. My parents never let us know that we were broke. But there are some people here in Vernon County that are living without running water, that are living without electricity, that are living in trailer homes that are absolutely falling apart and filth. And yeah, I was blown away that we as a community know, because we're delivering meals to these people every day, but that's all we're doing. We're not going back to the church and saying, hey, these people could use more than just a meal. These people could use Bible studies for their kids, or they could use a phone call if somebody check on them. And a lot of times you are very proud. You don't want to ask for help, and I understand that, because I would never want anybody to know that I was struggling. But if I have to embarrass myself a little bit to take that giant leap for somebody else, then that's what I'll do. And I'll admit it, we've been poor before. We've been poor. We had to decide sometimes if we were gonna, when we and Ben first got married, and I tell the story all the time, we used to get hamburger helper, but we didn't have enough money for hamburgers, so we just ate the helper. And like, that was life. That was life. But we have to acknowledge that as a church, you know, we have all these funds going into missions and missions overseas. I'm not sending another dime of my money overseas until every kid here in Vernon County is fed. Because if things are not right in my own house, I can't be taking care of somebody else's house. So we need to fix things here. You know, there's all these, like I said, all these mission works that are going on, and they ask you to send your money to all these missionaries and stuff, which is a very important thing to do. I totally agree with that. But if there's a kid here that's going hungry, my money's going to go to that first. And as churches, we need to acknowledge that we know this problem exists, and we see it, and we need to do more about it. We need to acknowledge that these people need help, whether they come to church or not. We need to take that first step, because getting them here isn't as important as planting that seed. Once you plant that seed for them, they're like, you know what? These people are coming from the church, because a lot of times one bad experience is going to turn somebody away from the church. One person says something bad to you or looks at you the wrong way, and you're never going to go back to church again. And a lot of times people will tell you, somebody in the church said something, did something, hurt my feelings, and they turned me away. And we can turn around and be like, well, if that's all it took you to turn away from the church, you're not a very good Christian. Maybe they're not. But we're not watering that seed that, you know, we planted in Jesus. We're not watering their little Christian plant. Instead, we're cutting it off and be like, well, fine, you made that choice, that's on you. That's not Christian. Like, we acknowledge that these people are here in Vernon County, and we acknowledge that we need to take care of it.
Well, we're God's, Jesus' hands and feet to go out and about. To keep church in a building is wrong. It should be our place, our base of operation. And so, with Nancy, I just joined. Did I say what group I'm in? No. Oh, yes. A women's group. Okay. And what could a women's group that is not, you know, tied to this church, what could we do to help you to reach out, as Nancy
a lot of times, food is a big, when you're living in poverty, food, basic necessities are hard to get. Forget TVs and video games and stuff. When you are living day to day, the biggest things that are needed are basic necessities: shampoo, conditioner, food. What else, Ms. Jackson, do you think, you know, that?
Those are ideal things. Now, what you have to do is you have to make sure that you channel your funds. The reason why I don't give to the United Nations, is that what that is? Yeah, United Way, because the money don't stay in Long Falls. It don't stay in Vernon County. It goes to Austin and distributed around. Now, working with the resource center, you have to be able to sit down and talk with that individual and see where they are. Then you can do that. This church, we feed 1,000. We send out 1,000 plates a month. 1,000 plates a month. Now, we can't give money because we don't have those type funds to help with a light bill and water bill and all those things like that.
Right.
What we do is we refer them to different resources for
Grand Lakes Crisis Center, Grand Lakes Family Crisis Center.
yeah, and the best one is
St. Joseph's is over there.
That's a great organization that will help. They just put together Hill Country how to make network. Now, crisis thing. Now, what you have to do is you know the needs, you know where they are. All of us, most of us, know where the needs are. We know the abusers. When I say abusers, people that's always trying to get you to pay their bill or whatever. But then there are absolutely necessary people. We had 3 people stay on the church property. So we had to go buy a portable shower and rent a porta potty because of the fact they had their truck. They couldn't go anywhere in the area because they couldn't stay overnight or whatever. So we provided that. There are a lot of people that are home insecure. Like Amber said about them trailers. I mean, we're talking like taped together with duct tape. Now, the city does not make the owner responsible. You stand there, you got to pay your rent, the water running under the house, the sewer, the whatever. So you have to live that way because in fact you can't pay your rent. If everybody was brought to the level of Section 8 housing, then all of that would change. If they had to bring that property up, they had to spend some money on it, and they do a lot of it to the Hispanic people in Grand Children. A lot of it. And those kids don't have a lot. So, you know, all those things are available. So it's going to take money to get it done, but you have to have it, put it in the right place where you know that it's going to benefit somebody.
Right.
You just, United Way or whatever the other places are. No, we want it to be in Long Falls. We want it to be in Vernon County. They have, zip codes. They only help certain zip codes. If you happen to be in Bertram and Lottie calls me from the care and somebody needs some help, I can't do nothing for them. The other agencies can't do nothing because they're out of the zip code area. When we cut down all of these politics and all of this other stuff, maybe we'll be able to do something to help somebody to the next level. We've been talking about, now they don't have no back to school blast this year. A lot of people don't have jobs. How are they going to buy notebook paper and pencils and what have you?
No.
So, and shoes or whatever. Send an application out to try to get some shoes. I talked with Kevin about trying to get something together with Elevate Church. Somebody from the Lutheran Church is trying to put together some socks. We have to take, like Amber said, we got to take care of our community. We got to take care of our community. Yes, ma'am.
So, to not reinvent the wheel, to tap into a program to help. You know, say you provide meals, you say. So, do you do food drives, or would you take food donations?
We do food donations and monetary donations. He goes to Restaurant Depot and buy Lord's stuff. If you look in the kitchen back there, somebody bought clean their house out and bring a whole bunch of stuff. Those are clothes that somebody we gonna put on the porch. Somebody gonna come and get it. They come and get everything that come through. Was it 400 boxes of stuff we did the other day?
It's like a free store. You have a free store almost.
Yeah, they don't want to take the goodwill because they don't want to sell it because they want somebody to visit it from. So we try to do the whole mix.
Right? So you could take, maybe the group I belong to, maybe meet with someone personally to see how maybe we could do something to help.
Yeah, some kind of like fundraiser.
Yeah, or food donation, or if school supply. School supply donation.
They're working on that.
Yeah. I mean, so who would we talk to participate somewhat?
Right, you figure out, so it's all be distributed in one spot.
We want to help, and if you, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, we don't want to start something
Right.
Correct, Nancy?
Mm-hmm.
Women's group, Marble Falls here.
Yeah, well, the Finance Crisis Network is the network of churches that come together.
We're kind of guests today, we're having our,
Installment Crisis Network, I know, has done tremendous things in the community. My neighborhood was hit by the tornado on Easter morning, and they were, for at least a month, were bringing food and helping.
I've been donating masks, I swear. And to let you know, I work for Vulcan Materials in Spicewood. Me and my one coworker, are working on making a mask for every kid and teacher going back to school. So this is people be talking to me. Our masquerade parade. It is on August 15th. Like I said, we've been sewing masks like crazy people. And we're up to about 600, which there's 4,125 students in Marble Falls. So I'm hoping that not all of them are going back to school. I've been working till like 2 o'clock in the morning. But this is a private event, but I can invite you, because if I try to make it public, it will delete the whole thing. But like I said, me and my coworker are working on that. We are, I've brought masks to the Crisis Network. My work has a bunch of N95 masks and things like that, but we've also been making them. So this is just a drive-through thing that we're doing for the community. We kind of get a bad rep because we're in a kind of cruddy industry, but this is something that we are doing for the community here. So if you want to spread the word, August 15th from 10 to 2, you just drive through and your kid must be present with you in the car. You say how many kids you got, and we're going to give you a mask for every kid you got in your car. And then we do have the clear mask for the teachers so they can see your lips, because I know that is a concern for some of y'all.
I was going to add, you can search online, you can open up the phone book, but there are a lot of organizations that, whether they're serving, the Black community, or I think Amber made a great point about this, that this has become more of in a lot of ways, this is a socioeconomic issue. And so when you target those organizations that serve those communities that are impacted more highly statistically based on all of those things, you're reaching the communities that you want to reach, and everything from Highland Lakes Crisis Network, Highland Lakes Family Crisis Center serves women and children and survivors of sexual and domestic assault. That's how I moved to Marble Falls, actually.
Oh, okay.
So, and the services they provide are extensive. There's CASA that winds up, they appoint special advocates to work with children who are in the CPS system. So, there are a lot of organizations. So I would say, encourage you to choose whatever your heart or your organization is important to you and find one or several groups that tick those boxes for you and but they were there, and Miss Bessie's kind of an institution there herself here in Marble Falls, and she can probably tell you about anything more.
Okay, thank you very much, I appreciate that. Yeah, the Cheryl lives right here, right in the town. We're gonna get involved.
This group has been here, heard a lot of stuff, and you are enthused about that. That's something you want to make some change about stuff. Jesus said, when you sow seed, it's all on good ground, it's all on rocky ground, it's all on stony ground. We all do that. So don't get discouraged by the people you sow your seeds to that go to the next person. Because of the fact that even when Jesus comes back, people are going to deny him. We are just people. And that's just the way it is. We're going to deny Jesus, even looking at it. You know, like how some of those people that were killed, and some of those people that got dead, and they still take crucified. We're the same people. Life matters. You got to think about that. The reason it matters so much in this country is black lives are about 17% of the population. 17%. If Corona is killing 70% of us, how long before there won't be none of us left?
Exactly.
So you got to think about these kinds of things while you're talking to people. When you look at it, and you really take an in-depth look at it, Jesus came to save people. He ain't just going to save black people, white people, green people. He came, God gave his son into the world that the whole world might be saved. But he messed around and gave you free will. And when he gave you free will, you had a choice. You could either choose him or you could choose the opposition. And most of us choose the opposition. I was thinking about in the 1800s, Christianity and religion, people murdered more people in the name of Christianity than the Crusades were. They hung them, they shot them, they did all these kind of things. This went on into the 19th century. And now we're starting it all over again. You have to be thinking as a Christian. The biggest thing that we got to learn is the two things that God gave Moses. Love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the two most important things that God gave us. What? Love God. Not your car, not your money, not a lot of people out here have more money than they'll ever need. They can throw money away and never miss it. But they don't help their brother. So you have to understand people are people. And they have will. They can do what they want to. God is going to come down and slap you and say, don't do that. He will let you do what you want to do. But he gave you some standards to live by. And if you take and choose the standard, you can't go wrong. I'm still breathing.
I think a lot of times, and especially for me, people will ask, well, how do you know that person isn't going to use your blessing in a negative way? Once I pass that blessing on to what God does with that blessing, what he chooses to do with that, what that person does with that, that's on them. I've done my part. You know, I don't get to dictate how they use that blessing. I think a lot of times we're so scared and, oh, this is a known drug user or a known abuser of the system, and we all know those people. We get it. But once that blessing leaves my hand, it's gone into God's hands, and I have nothing to do with it anymore. That's it. And so we need to not get so caught up in trying to control where that blessing goes. You know, we plant that seed, and then we let God water it and do what He needs to do. We don't stifle it, and we don't control it, and that's it.
Amen. I know our bottom controls our attention. So I just want to ask, is there any question that you have that we need to address before we get up and exercise and try this another day?
Is there another meeting, like, this has been a series, it sounds like?
This is going to continue to go on for years, for decades, until we see and get on one accord and a change. So we have no series, we have no time limit. It's trying to help everybody get a good understanding. So if you go home and you think about something, write it down. So when you come back, you can ask.
We're going to be on, this is Saturday, at this time, on certain Saturdays of the month, or?
One about every quarter.
We're kind of going with the flow right
Yeah.
now.
Okay.
Probably on a quarterly basis.
Okay.
We're trying to give more of a notice. Like, it's just been, there were things that I wanted to address from the last one, and I went on vacation, and then things kind of got crazy. So we're going to try to do it more regularly, but we just want to keep those lines of communication open. We don't want to let this just die off, because, like I said, I don't want my kids talking about this in 20 years. I want my kids to be like, remember when our parents stood up and they did something and they changed it, and we don't have to deal with that anymore. That's what I want my kids to be talking about.
I am curious, I love that y'all actually did the Facebook event this time. Is that, I hope that's been effective. I don't know if that's.
We did it before, I think. This one, I think, it was just, I invited my friends from my Facebook. And I think that's why.
Yeah, and I just shared it with everybody. A lot of folks call, but knowing that, sometimes with short notice, some people get uncomfortable or don't know what to ask. So we're going to get a phone call later, which is fine. We'll answer the phone call.
We've actually had interaction today.
Okay.
Live interaction.
Amen.
Oh,
Thank y'all again for doing this.
All right. I'll be right there.
For everybody.
All right, do we have any more questions? Everyone's good. All right, okay, he's gone, so I'm going to pick on Deacon Jackson to give us a going home prayer. But I am going to say as the last statement, all the dates that she has given you on her little research, bring them dates up to today. And we can show you areas where all of that is still going on. That's the change we want to make. Please, sir.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for being with us, bringing us safe this far. Father, we realize that you're a mighty God. You can change minds, hearts, you can rule and super rule. Father, we just thank you that you are our God and that you got all power in your hand. Now be with us as we leave this place. Keep us in your hand. We need you to take it along with that. These and all other things we ask in the name of thy Son Jesus. Amen.
Thank you all for coming.
Don't have a